I think every musician who has once, an orchestral musician, who has once gone through a course where they need to learn a piece and conduct it in front of a good orchestra and in front of the audience and rehearse it, they will never look at the conductor the same way.
Conducting the Future. Our interview series starts from the question which ecological, political or social responsibilities conductors see included in their work today. In how far has a conductor's engagement changed since Herbert von Karajan's era, and how do conductors of today see the future of their profession? Can the answer to all be found in the music, or is that a naive attempt? From what point in one's career is a conductor in the position or even has the responsibility to influence our society? Conducting the Future.
If you look at the way the world works, there is a lot of new movements. There are a lot of things that are happening at the moment. There are social shifts, and these shifts, of course, are going to either we want it or not. It's going to change and influence also the music business and conducting, especially because conducting is seen as a kind of an executive art, because, a violinist who is a soloist is always a guest, a pianist is always a guest, singer is always a guest, but the conductor gets a title music director. And a music director is somebody who, it implies that it's a director, that means somehow is the responsibilities also for the organization and for the planning and for the long term and for the development. And so this is something that now is under a lot of scrutiny, because in today's world, everybody is very suspicious about leaders. Leaders in general are basically the leaders are not believed anymore. The authority and the limits of authority are questioned. Way of leading is always questioned. So conducting is a leading and leadership profession. So a lot of these questions will carry and on to the conducting profession. For example, conducting is a job for a man, or is it? Conducting is authority without compromise, or is it? All of these questions now are being asked, and this is in every leadership field. So I think that conducting, in a way, is going through changes that are logical within our culture.
How has the work of a conductor changed since Karajan's time?
Karajan lived in a time where there was still a very clear understanding of hierarchy. A powerful position had to be a little bit, show power, and very often the way power was shown at that time, and in some cases also at this time, is through diminishing others, through degrading others. I'm not necessarily sure that Karajan was like that, because I think that Karajan had a kind of an interesting balance between a real respect for musicians, and I think he also respected musicians. But I think that still the old-fashioned image of a leader in the Karajan's time was a kind of a little bit, arm's length, not easily accessible, quite serious. In general, this whole serious and a little threatening kind of posture, I think it was very much the case and norm at that time. When you listen to the rehearsal tapes of Toscanini and Celibidache, whatever, they're screaming on top of their lungs, totally just verbally abusing, I would say. The musicians, I mean, that time is long gone. And you know, but the certain image of the conductor still remains. So younger musicians, even though they never have had the experience of an autocratic conductor, are somehow suspicious a little bit of the whole profession and the power structure. And this is something that now very much is changing. I mean, in old times, of course, there was a different criteria too, because people really knew music, and the result was the most important thing. The most important thing was a really incredibly well rehearsed, perfectly conceptualized performance. Today, it's not the case. I mean, as much as I would like to be wrong about this, but it's not the case. I mean, a lot of the performances are good enough, not great, because the audience doesn't know the difference as much as they used to. There are some people who do, but in general, we are also begging and in the position of begging for the audience to come to the concerts. That wasn't the case during the Karajan's time. I mean, it was when Karajan showed up, that was an event, and you know, an average politician today doesn't know a name of any names of classical musicians. And if you look at, you know, depending on a country, in Germany a little bit better, go to America. I mean, this guy doesn't know anything about art and never been to a concert, never read a book. I mean, it's a quite a different cultural standard. So you have an entirely different position from which you lead. And conducting and any leadership, you have to take the situation that you're in and make something out of that.
Is it important to know how conductors worked earlier in history? As a conductor of today, do you shape your conducting according to a, say, inner state, if you're a people player or a more introvert person?
I think everything influences the orchestra conductor experience. I mean, for me, a person who knows history of conducting is most likely going to be a better conductor if the person has talent for conducting and good enough preparation and education. But I mean, if you talk to a young conductor, and I talk to a lot of young conductors, and I teach, one of my favorite things to do is to teach conducting, especially in Pärnu in my festival. The knowledge of the history of conducting is quite varied. Let's put it this way. There are some people, and usually, and this now, of course, is just from my experience. I don't want to get into any kind of stereotype, but usually very, very fanatical young conductors from Asian countries. Yeah, and I even in my eyes, I have a couple of the students who know every Furtjängi recording, every Knappresbusch recording, every pirate recording that was not issued, but was somehow found in, you know, some websites that exchange unpublished recordings and radio recordings. And then there are people who don't know, who are also conductors and who also love music and really want to come and become conductors, who don't know the name of Knappresbusch. They just don't. They never heard it. And so this is to the question. The answer to your question is that more you know, the better you are. I mean, you can't avoid this equation. If you don't know a piece by Hindemith, then you don't know it. If you know it and heard it once, you know it. But if you know 5 or 6 different performances of that piece, then you're talking to a person who has an entirely different scale and fanaticism for what they do. And inevitably that is going to show in the way they make music, and it's going to also give them more options of how to find their own voice, because they have heard 5 pieces of Pittsburgh Symphony by Hindemith. Another person didn't even know that kind of symphony exists.
What did you listen to and how did you learn? You come from Estonia, which at that time was a closed country. Your father is a conductor. Your brother has become a conductor as well.
My father's brother was also a conductor.
Wow, a family of conductors. So, was it only sneaking in as a child, as we know many stories of musicians today who simply watched their parents rehearsing? Was it more from listening and reading? Because obviously you couldn't watch many conductors.
It's from listening to recordings, it's from talking to my father, and it's being in the position where somebody who is a fanatical music lover and a conductor who is literally at home and guides you through all the things which it would take 30 years to discover. So to me it was just a pure luck, because not everybody is born in a musical family or a conductor's family, but what happens really is that if you have, in my case, a very close relationship with my father, we listen to different recordings, or listen to different interpretations of the same piece. And he had one of the largest record collections in then Soviet Union. Estonia was part of Soviet Union. It was occupied by Russians for 70 years. And so if you have an option to listen to a Mavlast in 4 different versions, or Bach Matthäus Passion in 4 different versions, then of course you start hearing certain differences, and these things actually develop you. If you just hear something and say, well, I like it, or I don't like it. If this is the 2 options, then, and nobody will point out, but what, listen to this. But did you hear how there's one long flute line, but you didn't hear them change. But in the score, first flute plays and then the second flute plays. But on the score, in the performance, in the record, you didn't hear them change. Let's listen again. So oh yeah, that's right. Did you hear it? No, I didn't. You see, this kind of thing, and that's how I grew up. I grew up trying to kind of assimilate information, but it was always a game. It was never a study. It was always literally a game. Which composer is it? He put on a CD, on a no CDs at the time, LP. If you don't know the composer, which era, Romantic, Classical, Baroque. If you don't know that, which country? Does it sound like Russian music? Does it sound like German music? Does it like Czech? And if you do this all your childhood, you become very, very good at guessing and very good at recognizing certain patterns. And so, but there was always a competition between my sister and me, and that was always like, who can guess quicker what the piece is, So that was a game that we always played.
Your sister Marika has not decided to become a conductor. She's a flautist. What is the right balance of talent and influence and opportunity to choose your way of becoming a conductor?
Well, I think that, and I never thought about it before actually, but right now I just caught myself thinking that maybe if we would be growing up right now, my sister would maybe think about becoming a conductor, because at that time it was simply just no. There was not a job for women. Right now, it's a different reality. So in a way, I don't think it has anything to do with talent. She's just as talented as anybody else, and she's very talented. But it was simply not an option. So who knows? I mean, she might have become a conductor, and we would have had even one woman conductor in the family.
What do you tell your students? Because they want to become conductors, they bring the talent, but probably not the knowledge you gathered playfully when you were small. So if somebody comes and says, okay, I want to be this, but there's so much to watch, so many recordings to listen to, comparable on Spotify or YouTube, where to start and how not to get lost?
Well, I think that basic repertoire has to be sort of prioritized in some way during the at least basic studies. I always like to listen to things that were extremely outside of the box. You know, we listen to Martinu symphonies, and we listen to, you know, Janacek and Glazunov and Leadov's and Taneyev symphonies. I mean, but if you start studying conducting, I think that there are certain things you need to know. You need to become very, very well acquainted, and in fact, intimately acquainted. So Beethoven symphonies. You know, you need to know the Beethoven symphonies and all the issues with orchestrations and the keys and the metronome markings and all of that stuff. You know, if you are in a curriculum like I was in Curtis, then the teacher had a very clear list of pieces which he thought will teach us different things, and that knowledge we can then sort of superimpose on other pieces of similar style. For example, we had to learn La Mer and all the issues of orchestration, all the very, very intricate stylistic issues and color, and also the many, many mistakes that are still, by the way, existing in that score, and especially in France. And then you would have a Bartók Concerto for Orchestra, Rite of Spring, but then definitely a Brahms symphony, definitely one of the Haydns, and so on. So Tchaikovsky maybe. So there had to be a certain, you need to touch, but in depth, something from each category. And I think that that might be a good advice for the starting conductor anyway. That doesn't mean that on this, you know, time that's left over, you shouldn't be listening to Steve Reich or you know, Anna Torvaldsdottir or whoever, Arvo Pärt or Leppo Sumera or Erkki Sventur. That you have to do at the time, you know, from your sleep time, you know, because you're so interested and you're so curious that I know I have to sleep, but I listen to this. This sounds interesting. This is what we used to do.
Whom do you decide to work with on the orchestra side? You seem to have orchestras all around the world, starting from the NHK Symphony Orchestra in Tokyo, Tonhalle Zürich, Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie Bremen. You are conductor laureate to Frankfurt Radio Symphony and Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. They are all dear to your heart, but it's like having children on each continent. How do you manage to do that? And where do you have to say, okay, stop?
Well, I think this is an interesting question, actually a very good question, because many people misunderstand the motivation behind having 3 orchestras and being a chief conductor of 3 orchestras, let's say. I totally understand if one just wants to devote to one orchestra. I have no issues with that whatsoever. But so what happens to the person who usually conducts one orchestra as a chief conductor? They are with their orchestra, no, maximum 16, 17 weeks, but normally 14. And these weeks are sort of divided in equal portions throughout the season. And that gives a kind of an audience, an orchestra, sort of an illusion of continuity. In reality, it's 14 weeks, so 2 weeks every month. And what do those conductors do the rest of the time? They go to other orchestras and they guest conduct. And that's exactly what I did as well, until I realized that I cannot get a result that good out of the guest conducting experience, because I am not connected to that orchestra. I might be a welcome guest, but I'm still a guest. And the thing is that if you spend 3 years with 3 different orchestras, and in every place you are somebody who they consider a part of their organization, you have a way of changing the mentality of the orchestra, the sound, and not necessarily changing the sound, but the direction in which the orchestra goes. And your every new appearance somehow builds on the appearance that that you had before. And usually, even if you're a very popular guest as a guest conductor, you come back every orchestra every 2 years, maybe, sometimes 3 years. After 3 years, you have to start everything from zero. Even after 2 years, because the orchestras play with different conductors every week. So for me, in order to get more continuity and musical quality, I decided to guest conduct less and concentrate more on the orchestras that really, where I have also a contractually given a mandate to develop that orchestra and change the orchestra and make it better and create a profile for that orchestra. And that's why I have decided to do 3 orchestras as a chief rather than 1, and then go around the world and doing those prestige dates, which is with famous orchestras where you are just one of the many faces that they see, and they just basically say, "Oh, nice to see you, and very nice that you're leaving," and that's it.
How do the different voices of your orchestras make your conductor's world a whole one?
Well, every orchestra is basically pretty much plays the way that the society and the world within their city works. You know, French play a certain way because they're French and they have a French culture and they live in Paris. So everything that you can say about life in Paris, that applies also the way the orchestra plays. It's chaotic, it's unconcentrated, but wonderfully musical. It is incredibly sensitive to nuance. It has all the qualities, good and bad, of a French society. The same thing in Germany. You have an obsessive concentration with detail, at the same time also understanding of being open-minded to different styles. At the same time, there is also certain pedantic streak sometimes, which you have to say, look, it is right, but it doesn't sound like music. That doesn't sound like music. I mean, it sounds more like an exercise. But at the highest level, it is absolutely fantastic. If you go to Japan, you realize that certain things you will never be able to change, because in Japanese society, certain things are simply not allowed. Like, for example, I need and value eye contact in performances. I think musicians whose eyes you don't see, you don't concentrate, you don't talk to them, you don't communicate with them in a truly important way. And I kept asking, please, eye contact, look at me, look at what I'm doing, and then I realized that when I go in the hallway and there are people who are in the staff or people who clean the hall, when I go back, they always look like this. It is impolite to look in the eye. It's aggressive and impolite and they are taught from the childhood that looking in the eye is not a polite thing to do. And so I realized that I have to get that attention some other way, because they will not directly look in the eye, because they are not, they're brought up with a different value system. And many small little things like that, because when I say something, they will look at the leader looks at the other leader, and they sort of, they need to agree, because it is the way they work in Japanese society. And I respect it. So I find a way to work around it, and it works wonderfully. But for me to try to change what they are is pointless, because I actually fell in love with these orchestras because what they are and the way they are. So for me, to try to go and change the foundation of that culture would be totally ridiculous and wouldn't work anyway. So you have to be aware of your surroundings and enjoy what they can add to what you already know.
Hierarchy and very strict rules in an orchestra, if we connect this to Karajan once more, is that something orchestras in Europe lack already? And what is a positive aspect to that change of orchestra culture?
It very much depends of how the hierarchy is articulated and how it is really functioning in real terms. Because without a certain pyramid or hierarchy, orchestras just simply wouldn't work. I mean, I like very much, there was a famous story when Mazur in France said, you know, I like democracy very much, but orchestra is not a democracy. You know, that was the old world sort of understanding how orchestra works. I don't know. Orchestra, I think, can be democracy as well, but and I know this very well from Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie, which is a self-governed orchestra that makes all the decisions that have to do with their management, the conductors, and artistic decisions. So it can work, and it works very well in the case of Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie. What it also means, though, is that if the self-governed structure is, if it would be really functioning, and when it only functions really well when every single person in that orchestra really believes in that structure. In the case of Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie, it really works in that way. Every decision takes about 50% longer than it should. Everything is discussed in the meetings. Everything is sort of fought through, but in a way at the end, when everybody feels that this is the right thing, then they're all behind it. So I find it to be a great plus. One needs to remember that Kammerphilharmonie is also a very unique orchestra because the structure has been specifically designed to have enough freedom and not to be the regular orchestra, to have a say in their life. Normally, the normal orchestra is not really, it's impossible to run an orchestra like that on a daily scale. If you would be in London, for example, a London orchestra that is self-governed is pretty much very hierarchy ridden. They choose the leaders and then they basically follow them. But the financial and existential realities are so strong at the moment that a lot of these hierarchies still at the end have to agree to things that they don't even like very much, if it helps them to survive and not go out of business. I think the hierarchy has to be there anyway. The way it looks to and feels to musicians has to be very clearly thought through, because one thing is hierarchy, other thing is a tyranny. If you are a autocratic leader, that's not a hierarchy. That means that you don't listen to anybody else's voice. In today's world, I think that's almost impossible, and I think in a way, I don't think it should be possible. I think it's very nice if you are able to talk and have certain clear discussions. At the same time, like with everything, I only talk to people who actually know what they're talking about. Because everybody in this world has an opinion, but very often they don't even know what the subject is. So I think it is very important, if we talk about touring, if we talk about program ideas, whatever, I need to know that the musician has understood the structure and the survival structure of the orchestra. Otherwise, it's like, I want to do this, or where should I do this? And let's say, when I was in Malmö Symphony, I remember my first music director job. Then we had daily or monthly meetings with musicians, and they always wanted, when the guest conducting list came up, they said, let's try to get Kurt Masur. And I said, but because I had to be diplomatic, but inside I knew that we will never get Kurt Masur, ever. He will never, ever, ever come to this orchestra. But it's because musicians didn't have an understanding of the musical world.
Speaking about hierarchies and communication, how can a young conductor learn to be an authority? If he or she is a beginner and there's people in the orchestra who are so much more experienced, how can a young person convince an orchestra that he or she is the right person to conduct?
Well, this is also partly something that comes with the talent of being a conductor. Because talent of being a good musician, that's something else. But conducting is a profession of communication, also leadership, but also understanding and of the climate in the orchestra, the people who are the ones who create climate. And some people never have any issue with authority. They're young, but they come on, they're very nice, they know what they're doing, and there is zero issue of authority, and they are 25 years old. And then there are people who are much older, much more experienced, and they have issues with authority. So it's partly a personality, but also a human experience of how to talk to people and how to ask for things in a way that musicians will be willing to try it. And if you are a young conductor, you cannot. I mean, we all made these mistakes when we were young. You cannot go in and just say, "Look, I'm a conductor. You have to do this." It doesn't work. And most of the musicians know the piece better probably anyway, because if you do the Dvorak 9 for the first time, they've played it, for 20 years. So in a way, a right cocktail or a balance of authority, humility, knowledge, and a human awareness is all part of the conducting job. How you teach it, I don't think one can really teach it. If I see somebody addressing an orchestra in a way that makes me a little bit uneasy, for example, in my conducting courses, I talk to that person. I said, "Listen, this is not the way to ask things. If you want something, then if you want a result, then find a way to ask differently. If you want everybody to hate you in 2 days, then you can continue doing this." And there are also moments where people don't even realize that they said something that is unacceptable to musicians. And it all depends on personality and also awareness of a young musician. But can you really teach it? I don't think so. I mean, I know people who are very young and walk in the room and just totally have control over it, and others who stand in the corner and are afraid to approach anybody and feel uncomfortable. So it's also a personality type.
Does that have to do with dedication? Because being a conductor mustn't be half-hearted. At the same time, young conductors have to convince themselves, this is what I want to do and will do for the rest of my life. There's no plan B. That's difficult these days.
It is. I mean, it is. I always advise my students that if you're not sure, then most likely it's not your thing. You shouldn't be doing it, because you need to really want to do this, because it's very hard to get into this business, and also succeeding and staying in this business is even harder. But every human being needs an encouragement. And I had a very wise teacher, Max Rudolph in Curtis, who's 90 years old, and he said something that I remember when I teach my students. And he said, he was a wonderful old man and wonderful human being and a great musician. And he said, in order to know how talented you are, you need a little bit of success. And, that is a very, very wise thing. And it, of course, came from the mouth of a 90-year-old. But, a lot of people, once they somehow feel a little bit like that they have achieved something or somehow did something well, and if people say that, and if they are encouraged, you might see the sides of that person, and personality sides and musical sides that you never saw before, even they never saw before themselves. So in a way, I try always to encourage people and bring out and highlight the things that they do well. Quietly, of course, I also very constructively say, look, this is something that needs to go, and that is not helpful, and you should judge the tempo better and think of this and that, whatever the case is. But this was very good. This was very good, and you still need to have something to hold on to. You can't just sing every lesson.
You also allow people in whom you can tell beforehand they will never be conductors because they are musicians, very talented instrumentalists. You let them try out. Is that a waste of time or is that your generosity?
I don't think it's a waste of time. I think every musician who has once, an orchestral musician, who has once gone through a course where they need to learn a piece and conduct it in front of a good orchestra and in front of the audience and rehearse it, they will never look at the conductor the same way in the orchestra when they sit back in the orchestra, because they always remember the experience of actually how complicated the whole thing is. You know, if you sit in a very good orchestra, have very good conductors, and the great conductors make everything look so easy and so simple and so organic and so natural. If you look at that, I can do that. This is what it was. It's easy. And some conductors we talked about before, Savalish, you know, who just came in and it felt like it was like he never learned conducting. It was just so organic. It just he was born with it somehow. But it wasn't like that. He was just so good that it seemed like he was born with it. And musicians sometimes, if they don't have the experience of actually trying to do it themselves, don't really respect it. Think that, well, it can't be that difficult. I mean, it's not like, you know, practicing scales for 8 hours a day for 25 years, you know. And so in one way, I think it should be almost mandatory for every musician who studies in a school to take or go into conducting in a more serious way, not kind of superficial way, because they will have a different appreciation for the profession. Also, a lot of musicians have interesting teaching jobs where they teach string sectionals and they prepare big wind orchestras and so on as guests, and a little bit of basic conducting knowledge helps them. So I don't think it's at all wasted time. In fact, it is creating quietly a culture of respect and appreciation for the profession.
Becoming one of the best or most respected or most interesting conductors in the world, what's the clue? Making many recordings, having worked with the big 5 or 10 orchestras in the world, having conducted the greatest works, or is it that one moment when you are becoming Beethoven yourself?
No, I don't think that, certainly not the words. I never felt I was a Beethoven himself. Um, and I think that there is no answer that I could really give you that is definitive. I first of all don't feel anywhere near as ready as you imply here. But thank you. But my point is still that it's a work in progress. When I look at my videos, and now everything is videotaped and live streamed and so on, I never liked them. I just don't like the way I look, and I don't like certain. I mean, I'm very critical about myself, but to me, it's a work in progress, and I think that I try to be better next time, and I also sort of see what it is, you know, little with a little distance, what can be improved. And you know what else is really helpful for me is to teach young conductors, because by teaching, you also re-evaluate every gesture, every musical gesture as well, not only physical, and every direction a conductor, the way conductor communicates, and all of these things are fluid. It's never sort of set in stone that this is right and this is wrong. It doesn't work like this. An interesting person, you know, Christian Tetzlaff could come with an incredibly old and famous piece and show a detail or something the way he does it that just totally changes your mind about the piece. And so for me, the right and wrong is not really an option. It is a process. But what does help, I think, is to be very clear about the goals that you want to achieve. And my goals have always been connected with an orchestra. If I am a music director of, Orchestra de Paris, I need to leave something behind. The orchestra needs to be better shape when I leave, and there needs to be a legacy. With Frankfurt, we have created a really noticeable legacy of work, and some of the things I'm really proud of, like Franz Schmidt symphonies, or Nielsen symphonies, or the Bruckners we did there, all Mahlers that we have done on DVD. I mean, it was only 7 years, but this is something that has brought the orchestra into international visibility. Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie is like a family. But after the Beethoven, we did the Beethoven cycle for maybe 10 years and recorded all of it so slowly and so painstakingly. But now we have a wonderful Beethoven cycle, and everybody in the world seems to know about it. And then Schumann and Brahms after that. So I think that the goals have to be musical, and then when you do something well enough, you'll be noticed. Somebody will notice that this is good, this is really good, and then your pressure is on, because you cannot put anything less than that. And this is why my life is interesting. Right now we are just releasing our first Tchaikovsky CD from the cycle of Tchaikovsky symphonies with Zürich Tonhalle. And this is a big challenge. There is no shortage of Tchaikovsky symphonies. But it's exciting to really find a way to do Tchaikovsky so that it will have something special. And maybe we are all fooling ourselves, and maybe there is nothing special about it, but you can't live like that. You have to really believe that you can do something that has a place and that you are proud of when you are, sitting at home at the age of 105 and listening to your own CDs. But the point is, there has to be a certain goal, and a good musical goal. If you do it well enough, and if you're fanatical enough about it, people notice. That's all. Awards make no difference, and all the labels make no difference. Label as awards is all external. What makes a difference is something of quality. And for me, I know what I respect and what I don't respect. I respect people from the history of music who have created something. I'm talking about conductors who have. George Zell made the Cleveland Orchestra a major orchestra and a great orchestra. Fritz Reiner and Scholti did it was Chicago. Just to give you, Furtwängler Karajan, Berlin. You have from the old Mravinsky in Russia, for example. These are the people who did something, not just sort of prestige guest conduct, but spend time to fine-tuning and making everything even more fine and even more this and more that, so that it really works and it really becomes part of DNA of the orchestra. These are great conductors to me. So that's what I've decided to do.